Hello, listeners. Welcome to a special emergency edition of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm the partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me is Elohim Monard. He is the PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in political communications. Not a lot of ado from me here. I just want to get straight into discussing what happened with the coup in Peru. Our fearless producer is in Egypt right now, so he's going to edit this as soon as he can and post it as soon as we can. We recorded on Friday. I hope we get it up on Friday. If it bleeds into the weekend, that's why we're all pushing hard here to get you guys the insights that you need. So enough from me. Hope you enjoy the emergency episode. Cheers. See you out there. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. All right, Elohim, you're back for round 2 on the podcast. We didn't plan this. It's an emergency episode because Peru just had what you told me in a LinkedIn message was the dumbest coup attempt in history. So let's break it down. Let's start with what just happened in Peru over the last, 48, 72 hours? We're going to get this out as fast as we can today. So what's happened over the last 2 or 3 days in Peru?
On Wednesday, Pedro Castillo, the president in that moment, decided suddenly, in an act of improvisation that history will recall, he decided to close the Congress, dissolve the Congress, to use his words. And with that, he formally started a coup. The problem is that this improvisation came with no previous preparation in terms of power. So how do you start a coup without support, clear support, express support of the army? How do you start a coup if you have 25% of popularity? How do you start a coup if you don't have allies, partners in the press, in the political parties? So you have a party who is actually struggling with you. So with all these considerations, he decided in 1 hour and a half, because there are some records and chronicles of what happened. He decided in 1 hour and a half to read a paper and practically imitate what Fujimori did 20 years before. And there is a lot saying of how the history doesn't repeat in the same way, and actually it repeats as a parody. And that's it. That is what happened. So this is a tragic comedy, right? Because it is funny how he tried to do that, and after that, 2 hours later, so I can say from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., he did realize he was alone. And he called the president of Mexico, and he asked for asylum. And the president of Mexico accepted. Pedro Castillo heads with his guard to the embassy, but in between, during the coordinations, the Congress started to vote an impeachment that was planned for that day, and that is actually the trigger for the coup, or the coup attempt. What happened? And this is another funny part for history. When he heads to the embassy of Mexico, the Congress just impeached him. So there was a lot of traffic. Lima has a lot of traffic. And because of the traffic, he didn't get to the embassy, and the guards receive the order from the big commanders of the police to arrest him. So he's arrested in the traffic of Lima on his way to the embassy of Mexico. I'm talking completely seriously.
I know it's really hard to make up. What do you? I mean, do you have any guess of what he was thinking? Like, do you think he had any chance? Do you think in his mind he thought he had any chance of success? Like, it's hard for me to get into his shoes and figure out what he thought he was going to achieve.
It is hard for everybody. Um, we can see it from a rational perspective. I think he was very scared to begin with, and we can start to unpack the reasons of why this happened this way. First and foremost, we talked, I think, in February,
We did.
January,
Mhm.
right? And one of the key points I underscored is the amateurism of our politician and especially of Pedro Castillo. So he was a new guy in this political, in the major leagues of the political ground. So this amateurism sometimes comes with this idea that power actually is in you and not in the institutions or in some other elements that you start to build to have legitimacy. So I do think that something happened in his mind because of this, because he's an inexperienced guy in politics, that he really thought that he gave an order and it was gonna suddenly start to the people is gonna start to obey. So that's one side,
Yeah.
amateurism. So he was very amateur. The other one is this desperation. He was desperate. He was a day before on Tuesday, all his people started to talk in media on about how he literally was receiving money in envelope
Mm.
and other accusations against his nephews and how he literally controlled a network of people asking money for contracts. So after the impeachment that was going to happen on Wednesday, anyway, he was going to go to jail. The key issue here is that, and apparently the trigger is that two of his closer people, one is Betsy Chavez, her prime minister, his prime minister in that moment, and Aníbal Torres, the former prime minister and in this moment an advisor. Apparently, they received the message that they didn't have the votes to avoid the impeachment.
Mm.
And it was very early in the morning on Wednesday. And they just got crazy. And they literally, there are chronicles that they said to President, we need to dissolve Congress. And when you see this poor guy reading the, the dissolution of Congress, his hands were really shaking. He was afraid. I don't know if he really knew what he was doing and all the consequences it would have on himself. So a mixture of this amateurism, this ineptitude in politics, this desperation, I think drove to a sudden, improvised, and no a decision with any risk assessment, any risk assessment for
Yeah.
himself, not even the country, for himself.
Well, before we kind of take us, I mean, first of all, the Peruvian political system, as we talked about in February, I mean, it chewed up Pedro Castillo and has basically spit him out in a much worse situation than he began. I wonder if he regrets kind of even starting this entire process for himself. But before we get to the sort of broader structural issues, just a random question aside, are there going to be any consequences for Mexico being willing to bring Castillo in?
No,
No.
no. So Mexico is taking his side on about different countries in Latin America that don't deserve any support, like Nicaragua, Venezuela. So Peru is one of them in terms of actually it's not even living that kind of dictatorship that Venezuela or Nicaragua are living. So I think it's part of a move of trying to bring together all these old school left and nothing new, nothing to
Nothing new, and
change.
like the Peruvian Mexican relations won't be impacted by the fact that Mexico was willing to take in Castillo. Like, will the next Peruvian government be mad at Mexico for offering even in the first place, or will it just kind of be seen as something different? I don't know what
Okay.
it will be seen like.
In that terms, in terms of Peru Mexico relationship, I think there are two possible consequences. The first one is in the Pacific Alliance, there was going to be a summit in Mexico that was canceled because the Congress didn't give the permission to Pedro Castillo to travel to Mexico. It was a month ago. So AMLO decided to transfer the presidency to Peru and make the meeting here in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, he was going to travel here. So I think there is a consequence in terms of how this um, Pacific Alliance issue will end up with Boric, Petro, and AMLO. Actually, Petro also tweeted against the arrest of Pedro Castillo. And Boric, from what I read, he didn't say anything yet. Maybe he said something. I didn't read it. But Petro and AMLO claimed that it was something against the left and the people, and you know the narrative.
Yeah, we need to do a whole nother episode on Petro and Colombia because I'm confused there, and he's done more than I thought he was going to do. But let's zoom out a little bit. The last time Peru had some kind of political constitutional crisis, whatever you want to call it, what you guys had 3 presidents in the span of a week? Was it 3 presidents in 2 weeks? I forget what it was there at the end
Yes,
of
it was
2020.
in November 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. It was 3 presidents in 2 weeks. And
So
now we have 6 presidents in 6 years on average.
well, my question was going to be sort of to get into the structural issues that you were talking about before we started recording. So, how many presidents do you think we're going to get in Peru in the next 6 months? Do you think we're going to cycle through another 3? Do you think that the Congress is just going to kind of make peace with Castillo's vice president, who apparently had betrayed him months ago, like, and had left the party? And anyway, just where do you think this goes from here? Because I think it points to the structural issues where I don't think anybody can condone what Castillo did, but Peru's Congress has had too much power, and no Peruvian president going back however many years has been able to do really anything because the situation is so fractured. I don't know how you fix that system once it's already developed, but my tongue-in-cheek question to you is, how many presidents in Peru in the next couple of months, and what does this mean more broadly for Peruvian politics?
My thesis is that we are having a kind of syndrome that we are addicts to crisis. The whole structure has an addiction, and obviously there are so many elements in this problem. To answer to your question before going to these elements, I think there's not going to be a new president in the next at least 1 year, because Dina Boluarte is actually legally she's legally a president, so the constitution allows her to be our president. And in terms of legitimacy, he has the support of power in Lima and actually the Congress. There are many demonstrations in this moment against partly her, but especially the Congress. So the claim is close the Congress. It's not only about Castillo. Okay, that's the claim of some people in the South, especially, and those places that were supporting Castillo before. However, I don't think these demonstrations have the power to really take Dina out of power. So in the next months, I see some stability in terms of what we had before. So stability is a relative term in Peru, right? So some stabilities, we are not going to change presidents in the next year, 1 year or 2 years. The paradox that she actually finds in this moment is that legally she can stay in power until 2026. That is a fact. But first, she said that she was going to resign if Pedro Castillo was impeached. She said that, and there are a lot of records that are in social media. And there are people who also want Congress out. So she has also the, the faculty to say, okay, I submit this law, this act, this proposal to the Congress to have elections before, maybe in 1 year. And this is a difficult claim. This is a paradox because the country needs stability, right? The country needs 3 years without new president, maybe with one minister for more than 1 year that we didn't have in the last year. But at the same time, I understand the claim of how to govern without legitimacy and how to govern with a Congress that doesn't have the legitimacy, right? So it's difficult. I think she's gonna try to stay. She's part of this idea of amateurism too. So I am not expecting a sudden statesmanship approach, but I don't know what's gonna happen because 6 months ago, what I told you was, or a little bit more, I told you Pedro Castillo is going to be impeached. That's a fact. We don't know how, we don't know when, but it's going to happen. We will take him out. In this case, with Dina Boluarte, I think that it depends a lot on how she develops her political capacity. If she does have political capacity, she will stay until 2026. But it means to deal with Congress, with a Congress that is difficult, is very obscure, I have to say.
Yes, although she's already shown more political pragmatism than Castillo, so maybe there's some hope there. I also
that's not difficult. That you and me have more pragmatism.
Well, if you and I were in charge of Peru, I dare say Peru would be doing great. No, I think we have plenty of policy skill. It's the political garbage that sucks. I also just wanted to ask, though, this is an interesting play, and we talked about this in February too, where Peru's political instability doesn't seem to translate into markets. So, I mean, Peruvian equities were down around 5% after the sort of coup attempt happened, but they've rebounded. They're actually above where they were before Castillo read his piece of paper. Peruvian currency was down maybe 1% or so. It's actually, again, stronger than it was before the thing started. So in some sense, the market is just sort of, I guess it's all priced in. We're just going to assume Peru is going to be governed by lunatics. And I guess that's what's working on in the economy. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the relationship between Peru's politics and Peru's economic prospects, because as we've discussed, like Peru has a lot of things going for it. If it even had a modicum of stable governance, it could be an incredibly great story within Latin America. It just keeps shooting itself in the foot.
I have two ideas about it. The first one is about the macroeconomic policy in terms of economy. So there was a joke that I read in social media was about how the president of the central bank in Peru has witnessed, I think, 8 or 9 presidents, okay, in 20 years. So he's the king, and the president passed through. Pedro Castillo couldn't remove him because we as a country are so traumatized with inflation, about what happened in the 80s with 7,000% of inflation, literally, that we respect our macroeconomic stability. We, as a nation, not only the elite, we as a nation respect that. And so I have to say that our central bank is an example in the world. And it has, by constitution, complete independence to do what they have to do. And the president of the central bank has the legitimacy to do whatever he wants to do. So that's the good news. Okay, so I think that we really achieved this ideal of dividing politics of economic policy or macroeconomic policy or in specific monetary policy. Okay. The bad news is that I think also this mess is good for some specific companies who want to come to Peru and avoid regulation because we don't have the capacity to watch some companies. So I am not saying all of the companies. I am not saying all of the industries, but in some specific industries and some specific business models, I think it works to have less regulation and a weak government that you can actually approach with a wide array of options to deal to negotiate with them.
Yep. I mean, that goes back to open veins of Latin America. And I think one of the reasons we have this rise of the Boriches and the Petros and the AMLOs and even the Lulas / the Bolsonaros, like I take your point. If you're a foreign interest and you just want to get stuff out of the ground and get it to market, chaos is probably better than any leader who has any strength behind them. Elohim, you have to go. I have to go. Thank you for making some time this morning. And we'll talk to you, I hope, soon, because we need to discuss what the heck is going on in Colombia and sort of what you think about Lula and everything else. So I hope you'll come back in a couple weeks' time and we can have a proper chat. But thank you for the emergency.
And Argentina, we are not alone. That's good, right?
Well, you'll never be as bad as Argentina. Argentina sort of sets the pace in the region, and boy, does it. Well, we could go into that too. The whole Kirchner. I mean, it's what a mess. So anyway, we'll have you back on soon.
Thank you very much. I hope that the audience understood a little bit more of what is happening in my country, which is a tragic comedy, and especially it's a tragedy for the poor. It's a tragedy for those who need policies to solve their problems in the everyday life. And that is important to say out of the jokes that we were doing about the dumbest coup ever.
No, and I'm glad you said that. It's really what makes it a tragedy, because Castillo, and I mean, he had a lot of strange thoughts, and obviously his impulses here weren't right, but he also spoke for the poor, at least. I think that was why he had some popularity, and it's pretty tragic that he gets into the system, and whether because he was desperate or he was an amateur or he had, bad tendencies, or maybe he was fundamentally bad at his core. I don't know, but he at least talked the talk of wanting to help those people who've been left out in the cold, and they'll be left out in the cold for a while longer. So,
maybe
all right.
some discussion for the future. What is the consequence in the left?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, because he's a proper leftist. They'll have to put away the big pencil and come up with something else.
See you. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.